There's not really any of this, Mr., Mrs., sir, madam. Everybody's pretty much on the first name basis, whether it's you talking to your doctor or your boss. It's like that Kevin Bacon game, like 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, 6 degrees of being Icelandic. Doesn't take that many steps to link you to just somebody random on the street. We have to address, the unofficial motto of Icelandic people, which is Þetta reddast. It will all work out eventually, somehow.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Dating Beyond Borders podcast. Today I'm speaking with Oskar from Speak Viking Courses, where he offers online Icelandic courses. And if you're interested, I'll leave a link below so you can check it out. In this episode, we'll dive into how Icelandic communication differs and its impact on dating, common misconceptions about Icelandic people, and what makes their approach to love and relationships so unique. So welcome, Oskar.
Thank you, Marina. Thank you for having me. Hi.
I love your Icelandic sweater.
Thank you so much. My grandmother made this for me, so I appreciate that.
That's a very Icelandic answer. I just made that up, but I think it's so cool that it's not that you bought it in some, gift shop, Icelandic gift shop, like your grandmother actually made this for you. But on this note, let's dive right into your specialty, which is communication. So my first question for you is, how is Icelandic communication different?
Icelandic communication might be a little bit different from what people are used to in that it's direct. It's very direct, and there are not a plethora of pleasantries in Icelandic. So oftentimes when people are asking me, oh, how do I say, could I please have this? Or, excuse me, I have to sort of pause and think and recalibrate my mind to a different set of, pleasantries. Because a lot of times you might find somebody walking into a store and saying not, could I please have something? But, I am going to have this.
Yeah, this is very interesting because, and is it just Icelandic, or do other Scandinavian languages like Swedish, Norwegian, do they have something similar to that?
I think that the other Scandinavian countries might have their hierarchies a little bit more set. So you always want to be sure of, who's in charge, that kind of thing. But because in Icelandic, at least in the language, people tend to be all on the same sort of level. So it's very direct and everybody is on a first name basis. There's not really any of this, Mr., Mrs., sir, madam. Everybody's pretty much on the first name basis, whether it's you talking to your doctor or your boss or a representative of Congress. Everybody's on kind of the same page.
So then is it kind of that if you are too formal in Iceland, in a way, you're not rude exactly, but you're bringing in unnecessary formalities that are unappreciated? It almost kind of feels like you're putting a distance in between people.
That could be the case. Yes. Yeah.
Mm. Yes, I've heard this. And I've heard this especially in the context of dating, because what I've heard from Icelandic women is that too much flattery or too much unnecessary, these kind of things that might maybe considered a little bit superficial, fake. Women just don't go for this kind of stuff in Iceland. Like, just say kind of what you think, what you feel, and don't exaggerate it too much.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. Yeah.
That's very interesting. And so you mentioned there is no word like please. Do people use please at all?
We do. You can do that. You can do something like, gæti ég fengið, which is could I have? But please, not exactly. No.
And is there a reason for that? Is it that same reason that it's a necessary formality?
I think manners, to a large extent, are something that we sort of, like a lot of other things, we import from other places. So these sort of pleasantries, social pleasantries around like ordering. I mean, I can remember when I was in England a few years ago, and I was working, and I was at a sandwich shop, and people would give me change that was too high. Like they would give me £20 for something that cost £2, and they would say, "Oh, I'm terribly sorry," because I had to give them too much change back in return. Something like that. If that happened in Iceland, nobody would be like, "Oh, I'm so terribly sorry about that."
Just
So we just, I think what it comes down to is that we're not taking each other too seriously, and we're not taking these sort of social interactions too seriously.
yeah, that's a great point. So when you go to England and you're faced with that incredible, that politeness, how does that make you feel as an Icelander?
I mean, I think it's sort of adorable. I think that's my experience of it. And likewise, when I go to somewhere like America, people are uh, very, very, very friendly and very open and very, pleasant and outgoing. And it's like refreshing. It's refreshing to somebody from a place where there is not this abundance of, you know, oh, hi, good morning, how are you? Oh, beautiful day, isn't it? Not so much of that going on in Iceland. So it's refreshing and it's fun to see and experience in other cultures, but it's not really something that we go in for in Iceland, I think.
I wonder if it has something to do with the fact that Iceland is such a small place and that people feel very connected to one another. Like it's a very tight knit community in a way.
That could definitely have an effect, yeah, and that is very true. And I think maybe both us here inside the country and people from abroad maybe don't quite understand just how small it is.
Yeah. What's the population right now? Last I checked, it was 360,000.
I think it's something around 380,000, and yeah, so yeah, not a big population of people.
When I was there, it was 350,000. I remember that number specifically because I was like, this is crazy. My subscriber rate, like I had, I think that amount of subscribers, and I thought, this is insane. It's like that whole country. If that whole country subscribed to my YouTube channel, it was, and I make that note to say Iceland is such a small, it's such a small country, but people say, no, you know what? It's not that small. There's actually quite a lot of people compared to many other countries. But I still think I mean, Reykjavik is the only populated city in the country, right?
Well, it's the only place that can legitimately call itself a city in Iceland. Yeah,
Yeah. And
yeah.
Reykjavik is basically just, for me, coming from Canada, it feels like a couple of streets and that's it. And then you come back.
And then you get people from, in the countryside from Iceland, and they get into Reykjavik, and they're just like, oh, get me out of here. This is too many people. This is crazy. I can't live like this. You know.
It's
So
all
it's
it's all in comparison, isn't it?
it's all relative. Yeah, yeah.
Yes. And you live in Reykjavik, correct?
Kópavogur, which is right next to Reykjavik.
And what is the population of the place that you live in?
Ooh, I don't know that
No.
offhand, but it's in the 10,000s. It's a pretty large place. Yeah.
Okay. I'll just agree to disagree.
Uh,
but but the fact that it's so small, do you tend to run into the same people over and over again?
I mean, that's definitely a possibility. And just to take an example, this morning I was at the swimming pool and sitting in the hot tub with two old guys there, and a woman walked past, and she said, hi, uncle, and their conversation continued, and they started talking about, oh, who is she and how is she related to you, and to just kind of jump off that into something slightly different. When Facebook first came online and people were starting to use Facebook, Iceland was one of the, I think, most fervent early adopters. Everybody in Iceland got on Facebook and linked up with their people and started looking up other people. And this is something that we kind of, maybe it's just ingrained in us in Iceland that, we're always trying to figure out who people are, where they're from, who they're related to, and how we might be somehow connected. And really, inevitably, it's like that Kevin Bacon game, like 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, 6 degrees of being Icelandic. Doesn't take that many steps to link you to just somebody random on the street.
Yes, when I was in Iceland, I heard that apparently the maximum degree of separation is something like ninth cousin. But I've heard that's also not very true, that people can be more distantly related or not related at all. What is your take on that?
Ooh, I'm a terrible person to ask about this. I'm so bad at, familial relations. But I think that, if you want to get like really removed from people, you know, best case is to link up with somebody who is not from Iceland at all, like an expat or somebody, from abroad.
And is that something that Icelanders not strive for, but when a foreigner comes to Iceland, do people get excited about it? Because, okay, there's no way this person is at all related to me.
Do you mean excited, like romantically excited, or
potentially romantically excited? Yes.
I mean, I think it's just as valid as anything else, if I'm just speaking from my point of view, but people are always different. And I know that, I've listened to some of your shows, people talking about dating people in, from Sweden, from Norway, from Denmark. And there is this sort of like wall up. And there is this kind of thing about, a lot of people in Iceland have this sort of like fixed circle of people that they hang out with, that they form maybe at a very early age. And it doesn't necessarily like expand as the years go by. People tend to just sort of like stay within their group. And I think, this could be the case, obviously, in other places than Iceland, but this is something that I have noticed and I've heard a lot from people that move abroad to Iceland.
Interesting. So people typically romantically meet each other through friends or within their own circle. They don't venture too far out.
In Iceland? I mean, I hate to generalize about that. I've heard all sorts of stories.
Yeah, but it is interesting that, and you're right. Like I found this to be true, to some degree in all Nordic countries, that people tend to stick with their group of friends, and they are not as open to meeting new friends. And I can imagine that this is especially true in Iceland because it is such a small knit community again, right? So you want to stay within your circle of your own people, right? And there's not that many Icelanders in general. Like I'd be high pressed to meet an Icelander abroad. Like I don't think most of the people that are listening to this probably have never even met an Icelander ever. It's not that you go around and it's not like Germans, you see a German in every country that you travel to, you will meet a German person or a French person, or a Brazilian. But an Icelander, like if you meet one, it's like, whoa, you have to tell your friends, I met an Icelander.
Here, look, I took a picture and everything. Look, they're real. They're actually real. They're not just in that Eurovision movie. They're actual people. That's funny because it seems like wherever I go in the world, I always manage to run into Icelandic people, and maybe it's like we're like magnets. I don't know.
Yeah, that could be it. Yeah.
Right.
Hey guys, I just wanted to take a second to thank you all for tuning into this podcast. These podcasts take so much work, so any of your support is much appreciated. If you have a second, please go and give it a follow and a 5 stars if you really enjoyed it. Now, back to the episode. Going back to just Icelandic culture. What is something that you find foreigners are often surprised by when they come to Iceland, or what are some misconceptions that people have about Icelandic people?
I think when people hear, like Scandinavia, Nordics, they kind of tend to group everybody together under one umbrella and go like, Norwegians, Swedes, Danes, Icelandic people, it's all kind of, more or less the same thing. The thing is about Icelandic people that people might not know about is that we're a bit more like cowboys of the north than some of the other Nordics, like the Norwegians, the Swedes, the Danes. They have this sort of like bit of like an Excel spreadsheet mindset going on, whereas we uh, tend to sort of kind of go our own route doing things, and that can sometimes be problematic. Sometimes it's beautiful and it creates wonderful new solutions, but I think people might be surprised if they don't know that Icelandic people, we might tend to be a little bit more towards North America in our way of thinking than necessarily Europe, or somewhere in between there. Like when you're in Iceland, and I don't know if you noticed this when you were here, you see pickup trucks all over the place, and you think to yourself, why am I seeing a pickup truck in a Nordic style IKEA sensibility type country? But there you go, that's the case. So maybe it's something to do with the nature and how unforgiving it is, and so that we have this sort of like a bit of like a frontiersman mentality when it comes to our way of thinking.
Very interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to kind of to remember how I felt and what the difference I felt between, let's say, Swedes and Danes and Norwegians, and let's not bring Finnish people into it because then it just gets really complicated. But they're their own thing. But and Icelanders, and I found that maybe Icelanders seem a little bit more, I don't want to say down to earth, because I feel like in a way, I mean, maybe not as much Swedes as they say. They're a little bit more, what's the word? Not prestigious, but they're a little bit more like they have that. I suppose like Danes and Danes are a little bit more down to earth, they say, but Icelanders I found really, really easy to communicate with. And I think it's that no nonsense type of attitude that people have in Iceland. As you said, people don't have the time or the energy for fake niceties. They just say what they think. And I felt in a way it was just easy to connect with people incredibly fast. And again, I did feel that to an extent in some Scandinavian countries where, again, these formalities don't exist and that, there's no hierarchy and none of this stuff. But still, there's a lot more distance that I found in at least Scandinavia compared to Iceland. And maybe it does come down to the fact that it's such a small place and people are just a lot more, I don't want to say simple, but you know what I mean? Like less formal.
Yeah. I mean, I think, it might have something to do with the fact that, in these other countries, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, you have a connection with sort of royalty, like a crown and a king and a queen and all this stuff. We don't have any of that in Iceland. And the last government that we were under before we became independent was Denmark for a long time. And I think there was a reason why we wanted to get out from under there, because we had this sort of independence mindset and wanting to be your own thing, come hell or high water, And some people say that we made a mistake doing that. That the Danish would have paved nice roads for us and could have had a very nice system here. But no, I think Icelandic people are, for good or bad, independent.
Mm. I've talked to other Icelandic people about traveling abroad and the things that surprise them. And something that I found that is interesting is that, Icelandic people, they have this love for their country, which is different from everyone else that I've talked to. I mean, and considering the fact that Iceland and its crazy weather where it can snow and rain and in one day, it's not always the most favorable of environments to come back to, but there's kind of this real love for Iceland. Do you feel that as well? Do you feel like when you travel abroad, Did you miss home, or are you just like, no, you know what? Actually, I would love to live somewhere in the south of Spain. Get me out of here.
That's a fantastic question, by the way. That's a great question. And a lot of people in Iceland, they have summer houses in Spain, so they sort of have a solution to this issue. But I'll refer this back to myself, this question, and specifically when I went to Vietnam in the fall of 2015, and I was there teaching English for a few months. And it started to dawn on me, I think, after about maybe 2.5, 3 months. It didn't take super long that I realized I hadn't really talked to anybody in Icelandic for a long time. And I hadn't heard other people around me talk in Icelandic. I mean, obviously, I was in Saigon, so, that would have been super weird if everybody started speaking Icelandic. But I realized then that I missed Iceland and I missed being able to just walk outside and breathe really crisp, fresh air and walking over to the tap and pouring myself a glass of water and drinking it right there, not from some plastic bottle. And I missed just hearing random people talk about whatever in Icelandic in the background. And there's this saying that we have in Iceland that goes, Heimskur heima alin. And that translates as stupid is the one who grows up at home. And it refers to, when you have dogs and the dogs stay on the farm all the time. If the dog gets lost once it's grown, it's going to stay lost because it's never been outside of the farm. It doesn't know its way back. So it's stupid. And I think it's really important to travel, and you tell me what you think, but I think it's so important to travel. It's such an enriching experience because you realize the things that are important and you realize things about yourself that you didn't really notice or think about before. You sort of just take it for granted when you are inside the picture. It's impossible to stand outside of the picture looking in going, that's kind of weird that you do that. And yeah, so that was huge for me. And just realizing that, yes, there are many things about Iceland and the language and the culture and the people that I missed.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting to hear you say that, and I agree. I think a lot of times when we're in our country, we feel like someone else or something else has it better than us, right? And you go there and you realize that you miss some of the things from back home. And I think it's especially true for you because, yeah, you're born and raised in one country and you've lived there, I would say, your whole life. And as I said, I feel like Icelandic people are closer to their culture in some way. Maybe because there's not so many of you and it's that closeness, but it's also that Iceland, besides all the things that may be negative, like it being a very expensive country and the weather, it has a really high quality of life. And I wonder if people in Iceland are happy. And I know this is a really loaded question, but I tend to ask this to people around the world because I'm always genuinely curious about the satisfaction that people feel. And maybe happy is not the right word, but do you feel like people in Iceland are content with their life?
I mean, I hate to be difficult, but I mean, I don't know if that is something sort of, aspirational to strive towards. Like, just like, how are you? Well, I'm content. But I mean, I think, wherever you are, you will figure out a way to be okay there. And so, like, again, back to, things that might surprise people about Icelandic culture and people is public swimming pools. I think when most people hear public swimming pool, they go, ew,
Chlorine.
gross. And like a floating band-aid somewhere and just yuck. No, thank you. But in Iceland, we have these amazing public swimming pools, and we have this abundance of not just clean water, but geothermal water that comes up from the ground, piping hot. So you don't need to use uh, gasoline to heat it up, or I don't know, whatever they do in other countries. I'm not sure how that works exactly, but yeah, I don't know how that works because we just take it for granted that yeah, the water's hot, it comes out of the ground, and I can go to the local swimming pool and have like a spa experience for a fraction of the price. And that is something that you can use, and I think we do use, to combat things like seasonal depression or, you know, just that strong longing of going and moving to Spain and never coming back when it's gone to build like, yesterday it was rain and today it's snowing and then all of a sudden now it's sun. I can't deal with this anymore. But if you have your local swimming pool and the hot tub and you can soak there and you can just let all that worrying just kind of, drift away. Don't worry about it. It's okay. And we're going to Tenerife in just a couple months, so it's gonna be fine. That's another inside thing about Icelandic people. Icelandic people love Tenerife more than anything in the world.
Why is that?
Because I think it's cheap, it's sunny, and it's like direct flights. So
And it's an island.
it's an island, yeah. So it feels kind of like, yeah, okay, I know how this works, but it's sunny, but it's still island, so I'm okay here. I'm good.
It is interesting too because Tenerife is the weather there. It never gets too hot. It's always kind of mild, isn't it? It's like 23, 24 degrees at all times of the year.
Yeah, I think that works well for us too. Yeah, and that's a good point because I was speaking to somebody from Greece, and they were in Greece this summer, and they said, "Oh, the weather here is 45 degrees," and I just go, I can't even imagine. And that's something about being in a cold place that people don't mention is that that question, would you rather be too hot or too cold? You always want to say, and it just makes sense. You want to be too cold because when you're too cold, you can always put on grandma's lopapesa, grandma's wool sweater, and sort of layer up. But if you're too hot, then you're just too hot, and you're just probably going to be miserable. At beyond a certain point.
Yeah.
You have this idea of like, oh, I'm going to put on that summer dress, and I'm going to look fabulous. I'm just going to be walking around, and then it's over 30 degrees and humidity, and you're just a hot, sweaty mess and the dress is like clinging to you and just so there are good things and bad things about living anywhere in the world.
Yeah, I think when it's too hot, you're way less productive as well. Your brain kind of shuts down. And also, I just feel like you just want to be outside doing things. You don't want to be at home. When it's too cold, you're very productive, but then you just kind of want to snuggle under a cozy cover, watch some Netflix,
Yeah,
do some work, that kind of stuff. So
yeah,
I'm a too hot person, though. I prefer the heat, but you're right. I do think that it's 45 is unbearable, or even 35 can be.
yeah.
Going back to language, what are some expressions that you have in Iceland that you don't have in other countries?
Well, speaking of the language, we have to address the unofficial motto of Icelandic people, which is "Þetta reddast," and basically, roughly translated, it means like it will all work out eventually, somehow. That's how we use it. When, the SHIT hits the fan, it's like, it'll all work out. So that's one. That's probably I have to, mention that one. Coming from a place where the primary occupations have been, fishing and farming, a lot of stuff comes from those worlds. So there's this great phrase that we have when everything's about to go, topsy-turvy and everything's getting messed up. We say, as a question, allt að fara í skrúfuna? Allt að fara í skrúfuna? Is everything going into the screw, meaning the screw on the back of the ship? like the net. Is the net getting into the screw and everything's getting messed up? So that's a phrase that I love because it's from, it comes from this real place, like a really real place, fishing, where it's life and death. And so that's a good phrase to have on deck, to use every now and then. Uh, what else we have that's good?
Well, I want to go back to the first one because tataradas.
Very good. Very good,
Thank you.
Marina. Very
Thank you
good.
so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that phrase. And I wonder because I have never heard of this anywhere else. This is a very Icelandic phrase. Again, in Scandinavia, they don't use this phrase. And I don't think it's their belief either. So do you hear people use this on a daily or a weekly or monthly basis? Have you heard people use this in difficult situations, actually?
I think that this has been adopted more, maybe prevalently, by people that are from other cultures that come here. I think we don't need to use it so much, Icelandic people, because we sort of live it. And I'll explain why, and maybe why it's not the case in the other Nordic countries, because I think they have a more stable climate. Their weather patterns are more sort of like they know what's about to happen. Icelandic weather, as you've no doubt experienced when you were here, can literally change in the span of 5 minutes.
Yeah, I call it
So
schizophrenic weather. It's a bit.
that's very accurate. Yeah, it's very accurate. So you can imagine how schizophrenic weather would affect a group of people over centuries. It's sort of like you can't have one without the other. And so when we say "Þættareddast" is sort of the unofficial motto of Icelandic people, that's because you do have to have that belief that everything is going to work out, because when you can't have any fixed plan, you always have to be able to adapt in a crisis.
Interesting. You've also mentioned you have something called window weather. What is that?
Window weather, that's a good one. Yeah, gluggaveður is window weather, and that's this very specific thing that happens when you get your hopes up and you put your guard down and you look out the window and it looks nice outside, even though, okay, it's September and the summer was not good. It looks nice right now out there. It's looking good. So I'm going to go out and I'm going to be wearing just a t-shirt, because it looks good. It must be good. And then you go out there and it is not good. It's cold. It just looked nice because it was tricking you, that schizophrenic weather, messing you all up. But when you get out there, it's freezing cold. But it looked nice because the sun got out.
So would you say that weather is your biggest dissatisfaction with your life in Iceland?
Yeah, let's dig down and really
a bit
get
of a
into,
therapy session here.
Yeah, what do you hate about your life in Iceland? Then is it the weather? I mean, it is a bone of contention for, I think, pretty much everybody who lives here. But then when you go to other places and you listen to people talk, they also like to complain about the weather there. So I think, there's the weather and there's the human condition. And the weather is unpredictable always everywhere, to an extent. But, how do you choose to take that on as a human being? Are you going to take that on and just be frustrated and miserable? Or are you going to learn to, and I know this is a terrible cliche, learn to dance in the raindrops?
Yeah.
I want to answer your question because no is the answer. Because I've never really understood this idea about being frustrated about the weather, because you can't change it. You cannot change the weather. So you can either move to somewhere, a climate that you're more happy with, or just accept that the weather is going to be what the weather is.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely true. And you're right. There are so many countries where people complain about the weather. Obviously, usually colder countries, but maybe that there's less to complain about. That's why they choose the weather as well. Like if you have difficulty in getting food and water, then your main concerns are not going to be the weather.
Yeah. No, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
But going back to the dating, let's talk about this myth or truth that, and we've touched upon it briefly before, that Icelanders date their cousins. Because this is something that I talked about, this is the reason my video went viral. People just went, whoa, my God, this is crazy. But I've talked to Icelandic people since then, and there's a bit of myth to that stereotype, that everyone's like six cousins, or that when you go on a date with people or when you meet someone, you have to immediately check the app to see how far removed are you, and that there is an app to tell you that. Apparently there is not. So tell me about that. Anything that you know about that?
Well, there is an app. There is a genealogy app in Iceland. It was not developed in order to not have sex with your cousins. But, I think that's sort of, it sort of fits where we're at in the world of this sort of clickbait, oh, really? Wow, that's weird. But, it's obviously comes in handy in a small place where the chances of, possibly having romantic relations with somebody that you're intimately related to, it's possible. It's good to have something like that app, but the app is really a connector to this genealogy database that we have going back a couple centuries. That is, again, because of how small Iceland is, we've been able to document how everybody is related in intimate detail. So before you get intimate with somebody and you're not totally sure if you're related or not, you can jump on the app and check it out.
Have you ever done it, or have any of your friends ever done this?
I mean, I have heard of people doing it, yes.
And they would do it just to see how closely connected they are to the person that they met.
Better safe than sorry.
But not everybody checks. So then if you meet someone at a party and you like each other, do you just kind of see what happens and then just hopefully we're not related kind of a thing? Or if we're related, it is what it is.
I mean, I can't say, can't speak from my own experience, but, I think, you can't go back in time if, you have a moment and, it happened to be maybe with somebody that you're closely related to, then, maybe, I don't know, therapy.
Is it true that it's 6 or more is okay?
Ooh, I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure how that works.
That's what I've heard from Icelandic people, and I've always wondered about that, how true that is. But apparently 6 or more moved is okay.
Well, what is just, like in general, okay?
I never have to think about this because I live in Canada and, no one is related to anyone else. And also everyone's from all over the world. So the chances of me and, I'm dating a Brazilian guy, I don't think we would be connected.
Okay, good. You got that thing taken care of.
We've kind of figured that out. But
good for you.
I know of different cultures where that's I mean, in India, right? People do date their third cousins, fourth cousins. Actually, that's usually how the matches are done. And yeah, that's considered totally okay. So I actually have no idea what is acceptable and what is dangerous in a way if you want to have kids, right?
Yeah.
But, going back to the whole casualness of Icelandic people, I want to call it casualness. I kind of see it as that, this lack of formality, this lack of fake things that people say to each other, or compliments, or these kind of things, or compliments that you don't mean, rather. Do you feel like that translates into dating heavily? Like, do you feel like first dates are more casual, or do people just see dating as a little bit more casual? In North America, there's a stereotype that people go to a restaurant, or they, there's a bit of that gender role dynamic, and there's a little bit of that kind of theater, what might be considered to many Nordic people.
Mm.
What do you think about this as it translates to Iceland?
Well, I think, I could give you two examples. I heard about somebody going on a date with an Icelandic, like a couple of Icelandic people, and this person was not from here. And the first date was with somebody, and they went to a swimming pool together, and then they went for ice cream afterwards. And that's a very sort of like wholesome first date and very Icelandic. So that's like a mwah, beautiful date. And like you mentioned, that's pretty casual. Um, the sort of like horror story date that the person then went on or also went on was, going to meet somebody at a bar, and they drank heavily, and then they just poured out all their grief and sorrows. And, oh, you don't believe it, I've been living here in Iceland, the weather is terrible, and Tenerife is just months and months from now. And so both sort of like casual dates, and very different. But I think it depends on the person, like if you're the type of person who thinks, oh, well, the first date needs to be something, very proper and nice and fancy, like a restaurant, then you're probably gonna get along with somebody else who thinks like that. Or if you find somebody who's not into that at all, it's gonna be a clash, and you're not gonna match. Or you find that person that loves going on a casual date, like ice cream and swimming.
I've heard of the ice cream dates. And actually, when I did some research and I just checked what typical dates are in Iceland, and usually you can't find any statistics on this because it's kind of, or any research on this because it's to each their own. But
Hmm.
Iceland seems to have a thing for ice cream, which I find puzzling because of the weather. It's not a country that would make you want ice cream in the winter. Like the last thing I would want is ice cream when it's like -5.
Marina, is right there in the name, Iceland.
Oh
You're
wow!
I'm sorry, you got it all wrong. Yeah, it's right.
Right.
It's in the name, Iceland.
Iceland should do promotions for ice cream.
Well, no, that is it's fascinating, right? Because you do hear that and you just go, huh? No, that couldn't be the case. Maybe they like ice cream in the summertime, but then, they go every once in a while in the wintertime. No. Icelandic people, they go get ice cream like nobody's business. Left and right, ice cream. Go to the swimming pool. What do you do after the swimming pool? Get ice cream. What's there to do today? Nothing. We're going to drive around, get some ice cream. Grandma just died. That's horrible. That's a shame. What are we gonna do? Let's go get some ice cream. It's a staple, and it really is like the Icelandic church ice cream shops.
Wow. It's crazy for me. The one thing that I want when it's really, really cold is like a good cup of like something hot, The last thing I want is an ice cream, but you're right. Maybe it's that like it's like that messaging with the word Iceland. It's like there's the ice, and then makes you crave ice cream in some way or another. But
Yeah, maybe it's like self hypnosis.
yeah,
It's not that bad. The weather's not that bad. We can go for ice cream. You want to go for ice cream? Let's go for ice cream because the weather's not that bad, right? Right?
yeah, yeah. It could be that if we can have ice cream, then it's actually not that cold.
Yeah, yeah. It can't be that bad.
Like that.
Yeah, we
Getting
can
really
go
deep ice cream.
get ice cream. Well, I think that's a great transition, maybe because you mentioned, the last thing you want is something cold when you're cold. But something that we do crave a lot, and we have a lot of, is coffee. We drink coffee also like nobody's business. And there's a phrase for that I can teach you. We talk about just having 10 drops of coffee. Um, Again, keeping it casual. It's not serious. It's not caffeine addiction. I'm just having literally 10 drops of coffee. So when you say you want coffee, but you just want a little bit, not too much, not crazy huge mugs like they had, on Friends whenever they went to that, Central Perk. Nothing crazy like that. It's just 10 drops of coffee. Okay. So I don't have a caffeine addiction. So don't tell me that. But the thing is, you will say that and you can have one cup of coffee and then another cup of coffee and then the third cup of coffee. And oh, look, it's lunchtime. I better have, you guessed it, more coffee. But, if you say tíu droppar, bara tíu dropa, and it's all fine, Marina.
Interesting. When you speak Icelandic, do Swedes and Norwegians and Danes, do they understand you?
That's a great question. I think we probably have an easier time of understanding them than they do us.
Right.
Yeah. And
Even Denmark?
oh yeah, they're the worst offenders. Yeah. Don't get me started about around Denmark. I don't know if this is anything that you probably don't want to do this, Marina, but there is a video. I was on a show where we did this whole back and forth. There was a Norwegian, a Dane, and an Icelander, and we were trying to understand Old Norse. So Old Norse is the language that the Vikings spoke, the ones that came from Norway and settled Iceland spoke something called Old Norse. And so, the name Speak Viking is sort of, a reference to this, that the Old Norse Viking language has sort of pretty much maintained its essence all the way to now and into what we call Icelandic. Modern day Icelandic is very close to Old Norse. So we're able to read ancient texts with relative ease. Whereas Norwegians, Swedes, Danes, when they look at these texts, they go, what is going on? I have no idea. And so, yeah, so that's a little bit of insight maybe into how Icelandic people are able to understand maybe Danes, Swedes, Norwegians better than the other way around.
Very interesting. They do say that Icelanders sound like elves. Sometimes I've heard this being said.
I think that's a really lovely compliment, and no, yeah, really, I do, and that is very consistently what I hear when people talk about Icelandic, the language. They talk about how beautiful it sounds, and that yes, it does kind of sound like this elvish language.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Compared to Danish, which sounds like you're throwing up potatoes.
You said it, not me.
Going back to relationships, traditional gender roles. As an Icelandic man, what do you think, in a relationship when you're dating someone, and what do you see from your friends? Do you find that Icelanders are very much equal when it comes to gender roles?
I feel like I have to go down like an octave now that you address me as an Icelandic man. Yes, as an Icelandic man. I from what I hear, and this is just it's a generalization, but what I hear from people coming from North America, women, is that they find Icelandic men are less. I mean, misogynistic is a very heavy word. Maybe there's something finer than that, but maybe Icelandic men are more open to like a non-traditional gender role in the marriage, in family, and raising children. It's, I think, probably more equal, on a more equal footing. And I'm stepping very lightly because I know everybody has very strong opinions about women are passionate about things that they do and they do well, and men have a certain idea about what they should do and what men should do. I think on the whole in Iceland, people tend to look at this as more of like we're equals. Like you can do whatever you want to do, you can be whoever you want to be, and it doesn't matter if you're a woman. And the same vice versa. I can be there to pick up the kid from kindergarten, and I could be a good role model and a good parent. And me being masculine, being a man, doesn't have to be detrimental or leave me out of the equation of certain things. In places like kindergartens in Iceland, you see there are women working there and there are men working there, you know. So yeah, I mean I hope that does
Sure.
some justice to your question.
Yes, yes. I think there's a strong emphasis on like equal partnership in a way that, yeah, I've definitely seen this a lot in Sweden with men like walking with prams. I've seen more men with babies than I saw women with babies. Um, Maybe because of their, I came during midsummer, could have been related to work. I'm not sure, but still, I that surprised me, and I think Iceland is quite similar in regards to that. I think, again, I think it's changing so much around the world nowadays. It's a complicated subject to speak on. Um, but what's interesting that, in Iceland, when I was doing the Singles Guide to Iceland, one of the girls said like, well, like if he like really pushes me to pay for me, like that's offensive to me because, I'm just like, because Iceland at this time, not sure if it's still, but it was considered like a highly feminist country, like that women were like the strongest out of all the Nordic countries. And so this was really interesting talking to women and just the women being like, you know what, I'd rather sometimes pay for the guy on the first date. And I've never heard that being said before. I don't know if that's been your experience at all, or if you've talked to women in Iceland and this is something that's still done, if it's going out of style. But um, again, yeah, like I've definitely heard of 50-50 being done on the first date, but I've never heard of the woman being like, no, I want to get him a drink. Why not? Like, what's the problem? Why not me?
Sure, sure. I think what I've seen and observed is that Icelandic women are very strong and they are super talented. They can do pretty much whatever they want to do, whether it's, career or, family situation. And yeah, I mean, I'm happy about that. I feel good about that. I have a daughter, and I think it's amazing that she has the potential to grow up in a place where she feels like I can be and do, whatever I want. If that's, in my heart, if that's what I feel is true, whether that's, being an astronaut or buying the guy the first drink on the date, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we're all, in the world all over sort of just there seems to be so much awakening about so many things and, sort of looking at stuff that we've been doing for a long time and just kind of assessing whether, that's the best way to go about it. I think if there was a dynamic like that on a first date where, you have somebody, man and then woman, and the woman goes, hey, well, why don't I pay for the drink, instead of you? I think that's right away opens the playing field up for something fun and exciting, and maybe some banter back and forth and good conversation. Instead of maybe walking into whatever it is. It could be this, could be a podcast interview, could be going to the store, meeting your friends, and just going into it always with the same sort of like, well, this is what we do. This is the role, and you do this, this, and I do this, this, and this, and then it just kind of plays out in a very sort of rote, familiar way, and there's never anything kind of new that comes out of that. Just playing the same roles again and again.
I really love the way that you put it because I think you're right. And I think it comes down to that ice cream date where I think you can be so much more yourself and you can have so much more fun if you break it up and do something different, like go to the pool and have ice cream instead of dressing up and going to the restaurant, sitting at the table, trying to force conversation, acting the role because you're in this
Yeah,
expensive place and this is how you're supposed to be. You don't genuinely get to know the person because if you're silly or you make jokes, it's not in line with the venue. You should be, you should be playing this part. And I don't think attraction is built that way. I think attraction is built when we let down our guards and we can just be silly and not laugh at ourselves. And if you want to get someone a drink, then get someone a drink. I mean, you're right. I think it's exactly that. It's the breaking report, right? It's like if we're sitting here having a podcast and we're like, okay, well, let's just follow the questions and not, not joke and not have any fun. Great, right? But that's not what makes interaction exciting. And I don't think it makes it exciting for people to listen to us if we're just like, no, let's follow the script 100%,
Yeah.
And I think you're right. I think you can definitely get way more attracted and way more interested in people if you see that like quirky, vulnerable side of their personality. And so that's why I personally, I agree with you. I think the casualness and the switching it up, it can work really well. But you have a daughter. So let me ask you a question. When it comes to marriage and commitment around the world, people are just basically feels like people are checking out. They're like, I don't know that I want to get married. I don't know that I want commitment. I'm going to stay single. I don't know that I want kids. How do you feel the attitude is in Iceland towards this? I don't know if that you've noticed anything. I'm sure you have other friends that have kids or that are married.
I mean, I think for better or worse, it's the same in Iceland as anywhere else in the world. It's like, you when you're in a relationship or you want to get married, it's really like it's a gamble. It's a risk, and you're making yourself super vulnerable. Not only, emotionally vulnerable, but there's, financial aspects to it. There are commitment aspects too if there's, family and children involved. Um um and I don't necessarily feel comfortable about speaking for all of Iceland. What I will say is that I think we are challenged just like everybody else is, and I don't think we necessarily have this sort of conservative attitude where people go, well, I mean, I'm married, and so that's it, and there's no backing out of that. I think maybe some other cultures might be like, well, you're going to hell if you're getting divorced. Maybe that's still around, but I don't think that's not really the case in Iceland, because people get married and people get separated, and life goes on. I would like to invoke a piece of text, a quote from one of my favorite poets. It's a man by the name of John Mayer. You may have heard of him, and he has a line in one of his songs, and it goes, "Life is full of sweet mistakes, and love's an honest one to make." And
Oh,
I think that's sort of that's what I think about. When you talk about like attitude towards marriage and stuff. It's
yeah,
like, yeah, it's always that. It's always that.
yeah.
It's yeah, it's a risk.
It's better than your body is a wonderland.
That's pretty good too. I mean, that's a good song. The video is really bad. If you watch the video, and you'll notice there, I have to be careful, because if I don't enunciate correctly, I say video. Video is an
Yeah.
Icelandic version of saying video. So I'm doing well. I'm pronouncing correctly. Video. But yeah, I think the kids today would call that video kind of cringe. But it's a good song. It's a good song.
A great point on the fact that like you can back out of things. I've noticed those when researching most Nordic countries, there's like a strong emphasis on making mistakes is encouraged. It's like, if you did something and you regret it, admit that it didn't go well, and then do something else. Like you're not going
Yeah.
to be judged for that. It's actually encouraged because it's very human
Yeah.
to make those mistakes. And of course, if you're not compatible with someone and it didn't work out, you get a divorce. And I know, like, for example, like in many Nordic countries, like people are just like, they'll divorce, they'll still be in very good relationship with their ex. They'll even hang out with their partners, their new partners, and they'll all kind of just stay friends. It's very much, from what I've read, it seems to be, it's not that you like get divorced and then you just hate each other. That happens, of course, as well. But it seems like people just kind of are able to act in a way where they put their feelings aside and just, okay, this seems like the right thing to do. And it's fine. It didn't work out. Move on,
Good.
there's no harm in being single and going for it again. It's worse to be with the wrong person, and that's it. That's your life. Put a period
Yeah.
on that, and
Yeah.
force yourself through that experience. Yeah, that's always such a tough one to speak about because again, things around the world are changing so fast that I can't say, oh well, Iceland is so different because of this and this. Like I feel like we're all kind of going that route of some people get married, a lot of people don't. Some people stay single, some people have kids, a lot of people don't. So it's really hard to figure out, um, you know, really what people's priorities are these days. It's very individual by individual based, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And going back to what you were saying about, being on the date, being yourself is whatever. If, being yourself is I'm never going to get married, then, there's shouldn't be anything wrong with that.
Mm-hmm. You should be honest
Or
about that.
yeah, yeah, just, if we are able to, get closer to ourselves, to our, honest, authentic, um beautiful selves, then that's something I think to strive for. And if I could just piggyback on that a little bit, I this is what I see a lot of times with my students when they're learning Icelandic. Not to be get too serious. When people are able to sort of by doing something that they love, passionate about, they get more connected with themselves, and I get to see that, and I think that's beautiful.
What is the biggest struggle people usually have with learning Icelandic? Is it a difficult language to learn?
I have heard that it is difficult. I think it depends on your background of languages and, depending on where you're at on the language branch, on the language tree, may be challenging. I think what I see the biggest challenge is, you just mentioned that thing about, being okay with mistakes. I think people judge themselves too harshly and they put this thing on a pedestal where they want to they want to attain some kind of perfection. I think in order to not be judged, in order to be safe and to feel okay and worried about, somebody walking in and going like, you're doing this all wrong. You should be ashamed of yourself. Go home. And what I try to do always in teaching Icelandic is just to say, hey, look, it's fine. We're here to practice and to learn. And it's a space for you to grow. And it's not a space for anybody to, put you down for not doing something the correct way, whatever that means.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I
yeah,
think there's something really interesting that happens when we drink, for example, and that's we all of a sudden gain incredible speaking capability and we think, wow, I'm really speaking, I don't know, Portuguese so well. And then the next morning you see this person that you're having a couple of beers with and you're like, I can no longer speak. And that's exactly it, is that when you're a little bit inebriated, you don't have this state, you're not overthinking it. You're not thinking, oh no, I made a mistake. Oh no, they're going to judge me. They're going to, you're just speaking because you don't care. And all of a sudden you can speak. Right. And I think it's what you're talking about. It's that sense of like, I have to attain perfection before I can open my mouth and speak in public, or God forbid, they will switch back into English. And that means I'm incompetent, you
yeah,
know? Yeah.
yeah. The drinking, turns the inner critic way, 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 way.
I love the sound effect on that.
Thank you. Thank you. I was practicing that before the interview. Um, but yeah, no, that's true. And I have a great story about this. There was one of my students came to Iceland in the 80s and he went to a farm to be there as like a au pair or something like that, just to stay at a farm for the summer to help out. And he had written a letter in English to a farmer and gotten a response back in English. And the letter made perfect sense. And so everything was set. He went there, he stayed with the farmer, met the farmer for the first time, and realized quickly that the farmer did not speak one sentence of English. He had had somebody else write the letter for him in English. But the student of mine realized one night after having a few shots of an Icelandic schnapps, that he could all of a sudden, speak Icelandic that much more easily. So yeah, that is very much the case in Vino Veritas when it comes to languages.
Interesting. Um, Oskar, what is my last question for you is, I mean, what should people, is there anything else to know for people before they come to Iceland, just about Icelandic people or about Icelandic dating culture or anything else that foreigners should be aware of when they travel to Iceland? I think we talked about these, just keeping things casual and not overdoing it. Is there anything else?
I think what goes a long way, just as an example, is, like learn a few phrases in Icelandic, and the Icelander as a whole is really going to be, I think, blown away by that. People, I think, and maybe you've found this because I know you've traveled a lot. Wherever you go, if you make a little bit of an effort, that really goes a long way with people. And I think you also really hit the nail on the head with the formality stuff. Like I think what people find jarring a lot of times is that there is this sort of coldness. And you mentioned Finland earlier, and you said Finland is a whole other thing. Finland is super complicated. And I've never had this experience exactly of what it must be like to meet an Icelander until I met somebody from Finland. And then I started, oh, okay, this is what we're doing. This is what's going on. There's a bit of like a resting BITCH face going on as a whole. And to not take it personally and
Where
to not let it jar you way out of everything. And just be aware that, it's not personal. It's not personal with us if we seem standoffish, if we seem angry. It's maybe just because Tenerife is a little bit too far away. It's not next week; it's next month, so we're a little bit like that. But I think, yeah, I think be if you can find it within yourself, be what's the word? Be yeah, just let it all hang out when you're here, and try it out and see what happens. Try saying something in Icelandic and see what happens, because there is not this great sense of hierarchy with us. Like, if you fall flat on your ass, you are just as ridiculous as, somebody from Congress or the king or whatever. We're all kind of on the same level. We've all made mistakes. We all do ridiculous things at one time or another. A friend of mine, when he came here to Iceland, he mixed up the words for eat and to pay. So when he went to pay for something, he said, I want to eat this. It was the Icelandic soccer jersey. And the person working there, speaking Icelandic, went, okay, I'm stopping everything. I want to see this. So I think, speaking again, going back to this thing about, Icelandic people being casual, not being so wrapped up in hierarchy and social whatever. If you are going to make mistakes, if you are going to make an ass out of yourself somewhere in the world, you might as well do it in Iceland, because we're not that fussed about it.
Yeah. And I do love that Icelanders have a great sense of humor. It's very dry. It's very sarcastic. It's very, it's smart. It's witty. I'd say, like, that's my experience. I mean, just talking to you and, that reminding me of my experience in Iceland with people just kind of just cracking jokes, but like very dry jokes. And I really enjoyed that. It's quite different. And it was easy to just kind of have this very easy, casual conversation, like we've known each other for years, because you're not trying to be overly nice or you're just kind of your very bare, like stripped bare self in a way, which I really enjoyed that,
And that's another thing that's good to know. If you're going to go to the public swimming pools in Iceland, you also have to be stripped bare. Not the way that you were talking about, in like you have to actually like strip bare in the changing rooms and wash everything completely nude. And that's another thing that might shock people when they get here. But it's good. It's for hygiene. It's not for any like weird reason, like people, look at you like that. It's not that. It's just about like you get naked, you wash yourself, and then you get ready for the pool. And everything is, clean.
Mm. Oskar, on this note of getting naked, I wanted to thank you so much for taking part in the podcast. And guys, I will link Oskar's courses under this video. If you're watching it, if you're listening to it, I'm just going to link that. And you can go check it out if you're interested in learning Icelandic. This is such a cool way to do it. And I would strongly encourage it. Obviously, if you're traveling to Iceland and you want to be a little bit more fluent with people, I think it will go a long way, would be appreciated. Oskar, thank you so much. Is there anything else where, people can check you out or anything else you want to say before we go?
Instagram and YouTube and Facebook. And I'll just say that, Icelandic might be the coolest language out there. I mean, it's right there again in the name, Iceland, Icelandic. So very cool. And yeah, that's about it. And I think you'll never regret, learning a new language. And you might as well make it something cool, like Icelandic.
Yeah. People ask you, like, how many languages do you speak? And you say, I speak, Spanish, Portuguese, or like, and Icelandic. And they could be like, whoa, that's just a cool thing to say when you're trying to impress people, even if you know like two sentences, but still, that's a cool thing too. that would surprise people.
And aren't we all here for that? We're here to flex on other people, So if you're going to flex with a language, flex extra hard.
And that's it. Thank you so much, Oskar. Have a great rest of your schizophrenic weather day.
Takk fyrir og bless bless.
Þetta er aldrei.
Þetta reddast.